Okay. Can you hear me, Chris? Is it working? Nope, he says higher up. Is that better? Not any better yet. Pardon? Yeah. Can you hear me? I need more volume from somebody. More volume, Chris. More volume. They say they can't hear me in the back. All right? Talk louder. I can do that. All right. Very quickly. Steve said he could hear me. Very quickly, I have still 2 or 3 copies of The Age of the Earth. Remember how we talked about that? That these 70 or 68 ages of how things are dated, if they can be wrong, these are all scientific people. If they can be wrong on the old dates, why can't they be wrong on the young dates or vice versa? There's also a thing on the news page with, you want one? Yeah, can I get one? Sure. How that they're redating. They're reconsidering the carbon-14 dating. How maybe it could be off. Maybe they were mistaken in how all that works. So anyway, how about for the Ezra itself? Anybody need Ezra itself? You need the whole of Ezra. You need it all. All right, I like it when people say, I need it all. Oh, one right here. Okay, there we go. There's all of Ezra. No more Ezras. We can print more if we need them. Okay. On your last page, page number 9, there's a list of dates. Let's look at that very quickly. I know we've talked about it and kind of slips by. We didn't have class last week. But I'd just like you to notice how it starts. And it starts with who? Well, it starts with Cyrus. He's the one that let him go. And as you looked in chapter 1 in Cyrus, it says that by the direction of God. Now, I don't know how that worked. I've been asked that before teaching class at Bear Valley about those things. How did he do that? Did he have a dream? Did an angel appear? Did it just message fall out of heaven? It doesn't say. But what it does say is God directed him to send the people back to build the house of God in Jerusalem. Words are very clear in chapter 1. So what time would have that been? Well, again, dealing with Cyrus, we're looking somewhere around 538, 539 on your last page. And by then, they'd been in captivity. Say it. They'd been in captivity how long? 70 years. 70 years. And we know the reason for that. It had to do with not letting the land rest for so many years. And the years went by, and the 7 times 70, and it's 449 years. They had year after year after year after year to do the right thing. And here's the interesting thing. Every year they heard the law. It was read to them year after year after year. So maybe one family missed out on it, or one generation, but all those generations for 449 years, they all just ignored it. Now help me out here. I'm a big wheat farmer. Can you think of any reason why I wouldn't want to not farm every 7 years? What would I lose out on, Steve? And he's thinking, the money. And isn't that true? I don't know if I'm making wheat on 22,000 acres. I know a fellow in Montana does that. They even come out, Borelli Noodle comes out and checks the wheat to make sure it's doing okay. It's sold before he even gets it planted. But anyway, greed. But anyway, they ended up paying for that by going into captivity. With who? And you're thinking, well, that's with Nebuchadnezzar. That's back in, kept him for 70 years. Not only did he take the people, what else did he take? All the stuff, the bowls, the plates, the silvers, the gold, everything. But what isn't mentioned? What is not mentioned The ark. Have no idea. Now, there are people that say different things about this and this and this, and there's a great number of people that think that's in Ethiopia, that it's maintained by one person, and when that person, when they're about ready to die, they appointed it. Nobody has ever seen it. But whatever they're guarding in that cave, somebody thinks it's in there, but nobody ever gets to see it. Anyway, be that as it may, if God needed them to have the ark, what would they have? The ark. But they had all the other stuff to go back with. So when we're looking there, and the reason I'm spending some time with this, when the people finally left, they've been in captivity. They've been in captivities for 70 years, and a year or so later, Cyrus lets them go. So let's just round it off, say 72 years before they started going back, because here's a whole group that goes back. Now, the reason I'm spending some time with this, we're going to see a little later, when they lay the foundation for the temple, and that's what Zerubbabel's going to be doing, is building the temple. When they laid the foundation, as you look through your lesson and read those verses, how did the people react? How did they react? You got two possibilities. Some were overjoyed that they were making the temple, but some were sad and cried and wept. And why were they doing that? It says at the end of chapter 3, because they remembered the former glory. Now, they're just seeing the foundation, but they could see that it was going to be a much smaller structure than what it had been before. But help me out here. How old would these people have been? It says the men cried and weep. How old do you think they would have been? Well, they had to seen the first temple. So if they were in captivity 72 years, those that are seeing the new foundation being laid and they're sad as a result, they're going to have to be like 90, plus 90. If you say, well, they were some that were in their teens, that's okay. But they are old people that are seeing the new beginning. And they were sad because it wasn't like what it was going to be. But how about the ones that had never seen it? They'd never seen the old one. Well, they were rejoicing. Why were they rejoicing? Well, because they were free and because they were seeing the temple that's going to be built. So we have that, and wanted to spend a few minutes with that. Of course, they're with Nebuchadnezzar in like 608, and they're being freed somewhere when you get that all together, and so 72 years of old people. Well, I want you to think about Ezra. Think about when he went back. When he went back, again, looking on your chart, it shows that he went back, still on page 9, that he went back about 458. About 458. So if the first group went back in 538, that would be Zerubbabel and the group that went with him, and Ezra went back in 458, how many years have gone by? Very quickly, and Bob is thinking, that's 80 years. And you're right, 80 years. So from the time that Zerubbabel went back and worked on building the building, we'll say some more things about that in a moment, and then finally Ezra went back, another 80 years had gone by. So by the time we think of being in captivity 70 years, and here's another 80 years, how much time has gone by since they've been, how many years is that? 150 years. How many people are still living? None. Those that originally went off into captivity, how many are living? None. Those that came out of captivity and were the first group to go back, probably not many of them are living, if any. Of course, generations go by, they repopulate and so on, but But time. Now can you just, now be thinking, help me out here. What would be the advantage of there not being any people left from the old days? And you're thinking, well, Brother Brandt, I don't have a clue. No. But seriously, there's no people to remember how it used to be. I mean, you know, you might get a story from a grandfather or something before they passed, but it's all new. The new temple, which is a different shape, different size, they still have the same what, though? The same law, the same reading of the law, the same commitment to make, the same sacrifices to make. So there you have it. So then you have, we'll skip ahead just a second, but I wanted to put this in here. So Ezra comes back into the land 80 years after Zerubbabel. Now the altar's built, the temple's built. Is that right? Yeah, we see that happening in 516 under Darius. We'll talk more about that as we look at the lesson, but just very quickly, did the people of the land want it to be built? Shake your head this way. No. They first offered to help. But when the help was refused, as you worked on your questions, as the help was refused, what did the people do? They wrote to the king and said, hey, these wicked, evil, rebellious people, if they build, what's going to happen? You're going to lose tax money. You're going to lose tribute. So you better stop them. Now, who was the letter sent to? You were doing your lesson. Who was the letter sent to about not to be building? And you're thinking, well, that letter came to Darius. And what did he do? He stopped the building. And later, when Artaxerxes looks at it, he looks through all that stuff, and he gets that letter of reminder. He looks for the old stuff, and he finds what kind of letter? As he looked through all the archives, what letter did he find? He found the decree of Cyrus. And what was the decree? Build. I won't spend too much time with that, but again, Cyrus had some direction from God to do such and such. Darius had some direction from God to do such and such. Artaxerxes has direction from God to do such and such, and even to care for his children. Now again, it doesn't say how they got that direction. It doesn't say, was there some talking from God? Was it a dream? Was it something, you know, it doesn't say that, but it just says they were directed. And guess what they did? They did it. That is the puzzlement to me. You know, Cyrus says in chapter 1, he rules all the kingdoms of the earth. And he did. And when Darius came along, what did he rule? All the kingdoms of the earth. And when Artaxerxes comes along later, he rules all the kingdoms of the earth. So what were they afraid of? Interesting. They knew something about the creator God of the universe. Interesting, I think. Doesn't say how they were instructed. But anyway, so we have Ezra coming back, and then very quickly we talked about Nehemiah, had several lessons with that. But he comes in 432. So by the time we get them returning, about 106 years have gone by. Let me say again, when they started coming back, about 106 years have gone by. They've been in captivity for 70 years. There is nobody left. Garen, nobody left that saw all the original stuff. So when Ezra comes, and that's who we're talking about now, when Ezra comes, what was his primary purpose? What was his reason for coming? Why did he come back to the people? And you're thinking, well, he was the teacher of the law. Now, all the time when they came back with Zerubbabel, there was 43,000 people. Who came with them? Well, priests and Levites. And they were teaching. The very first thing they did was start to offer sacrifices. They practiced the Feast of Booths. They knew what they should be doing, and they were doing those things. But we'll see a little later they didn't follow exactly as they should. But they knew that they should be doing certain things, and they did those things. But by the time Ezra comes, make no mistake, they're hearing the law. And we'll see as we go through the rest of Ezra, they repented and said, we will follow. I hate to say it. Did they? You know what I'm going to say. Shake your head this way. Steve's already doing it. No. But did they know what to do? What do you think, Pam? Yes, they knew what to do, but they didn't do it. And here we are. I hate to say it again. Here we are in 2020. We have the Old Testament. We have the New Testament. We have the fulfillment of all the Old Testament prophecies. We have all the things fulfilled concerning Christ, and we are waiting for his return. And what are we doing every day? Say the word. Sin. Do we know we should be doing it? Do it anyway. Sin. And aren't you glad? Aren't you glad that God forgives? On whose terms? On his. On his. And what he says, and I've said it several times before, as a Christian, 1 John says, confess your sins and he's righteous and faithful to forgive you. If you say you have no sin, you make him a liar and the truth is not in you. God says we sin, but the good news is he also says he'll forgive. Who, let me hear it, who is responsible as a Christian, who is responsible for your forgiveness? Say it. Me. I'm responsible for my forgiveness. Now, can I bring something to your attention and maybe something you've forgotten, or we can have a teaching together and maybe refresh our minds about such and such a thing? That's true. But bottom line is, it's you. And how was it with all the Old Testament people that we read about? In the end, who was responsible for their forgiveness? Say it. They were. It hadn't changed. Now, they had sacrifices to bring, wheat and animals and oil and flour, and we already talked about that, how that God was very forgiving. If you couldn't afford to bring an animal, what did he say? Yeah, there are other possibilities, even down to a handful of flour. God wants to forgive. Anyway, take a look at our lesson very quickly, and you can see how it moves along. And I already talked about this point on page number 3. On page number 3, what was the very first thing? What did they do? What did Joshua, the son of Joshua, and the brethren and the priests and Zerubbabel, the sons and the brothers, what did they build? What's the very first thing they did? Built the altar. Built the altar. I know some people, the very first thing they do when they go on vacation is find out where the church is. That's a good idea, isn't it? I know people that won't move to a certain town if it doesn't have a church there. They kind of base their life on, their relationship with God. Now, we as adult, that doesn't work. We as adult people, we want to direct our children. The easier way to do that is with the churches already there. Now, you can establish a church where you're at and reach out and, build up the body, that's for sure. But think about that. First thing they did was have the altar for burnt offerings and sacrifices. It was in the 7th month. But now the question number 2, what feast did they keep next? Feast of, what was it? Yeah, of booths, that's right. And what is that? That's camping out for 7 days. Is that right? Well, really, that's kind of what they did. They built shelters, but they offered sacrifices. And what were they remembering? Help me out here. What were they remembering? What is it? Yeah, wandering in the wilderness. In the wilderness for how long? 40 years. Well, they were remembering. Number 3, what work did Zerubbabel find to do? What work? Well, I put down laid the foundation for the temple, and that was in the 2nd year. In the 2nd year after he returned to Jerusalem. Well, we already said they didn't want to build, not many there, those that were living in the land. First, we said that thing, first they wanted to help, and when they couldn't, well, they became rebellious and wanted them to stop. We already talked about the old men weeping and so on, about the age of those things. The question number 4, what did the people sing when the foundation was laid, and even when there was some sadness among the older ones? What kind of songs were they singing? Verse 11 says that in chapter 3. What is it?
Praise and thanksgiving.
Yeah, songs of praise and thanksgiving. Can you imagine anything what the praise and thanksgiving might have been about? How about we're free? We're back in our land. We have our life under our control. Now, was it really under their control? No, they were still under the king. They just had a governor to send word back. But basically, they were free. And it still amazes me when Cyrus said, leave. Any that want. Anybody that wants to leave, leave. Not many, compared to what was there. Not everybody left. We know later another 45,000 left. We also know that still others were there. Anyway, songs of praise. He is good. Songs of thanks. And that was only with the laying of the foundation. I also put down because of his loving kindness. You can read all that in verse 11 in chapter 3. But down in chapter 4, the interpretation or the interruption, the construction of the temple, we sort of talked about that in passing. But anyway, let us build with you. Well, that's what the people of the land were saying. Let us build with you. We like you. We seek your God. The king of Syria carried us off into captivity. Well, who was saying that? Who would have been the people that was carried off into Assyrian captivity? And what is it? The northern tribes, those 10 tribes in the north. Well, so when we're thinking about these that are wanting to help, those that are wanting to join in, who would they have been? Those from the north. Once the king, the Assyrian king carried them off into captivity and they weren't in the land any longer, historically, as you read back on all that, and even some biblical texts, what do you see happening? He returns some to the land. Why would he want people to come back to the land? For his profit, keeping the fields, keeping the vineyards, keeping the orchards, keeping things alive. So they went back and lived there. But in the meantime, they said, well, we're worshiping your God. What had God done with the northern tribes? Just say it. Cut them off. They were no longer a part of the people. They were no longer a part of the chosen people, if I can use that terminology. Now had their worshiping, by the time Christ came, Their center of activity was where? In Samaria. And even Jesus spoke to the woman at the well, and what was their question? Our fathers say to worship here in the mountain, and you're saying worship in Jerusalem. And what did Jesus say? You're looking in John chapter 4. The time will come when you not worship in the mountain nor worship in Jerusalem. For God is a spirit, and those that worship him must worship him how? In spirit and in truth. There's not going to be a certain place. But if you were of the tribe of Judah or Benjamin at this time, up to the time of Christ, where would you have been worshiping? Jerusalem. And even as we see it in Acts chapter 2, who came for the Passover time? You read that list of 13, 14 different nations of people. It says devout Jews of every nation under heaven. They lived different places. But when it came time for the feast days, where did they come? They came back for the feast. They knew how it should be. But here's an interesting point. If you were a faithful Jew living, I don't know, say in Italy, because of the transportation system, do you know just traveling back and forth to your home that you would miss one of those feasts just because of the traveling? Not say nothing of getting to live where you're supposed to be living. God never intended for others to live in other places and worship in Jerusalem. He intended to be where? In Jerusalem, in Judea, if you will. And that's the tribe of Benjamin and Judah. Interesting to me. Anyway, so they were building. The people resisted. They wrote letters. I got this written down here. How did Zerubbabel and Josiah respond? What was their response to the request? Let us help you. They would do it alone. What is the rest of it? Did not let them. Really, when I put down my verse, I put down, you have nothing to do. You have nothing in common with us. We will build. Now that's pretty strong language. You're looking there in chapter 4. And really, what would that say? Here's a group of 150 people, just hypothetically, and you're over there trying to work on something, and they say, let me help you. And you say, no, you have nothing to do with this. How would you feel? Now this is a key thing. Who did they think they were? Those stragglers from the north. Who did they think they were? They still thought what? We are God's people. Let us help you. But they weren't God's people any longer. Who says, help me out here, who says who my people are? Speaking of God. Who says who God's people are? Who says that? Say it, Bob. God does. God decides who his people are. And how about today? Who decides who his people are? He does. And again, just basic teaching. And you see it there at the end of chapter 2. And the Lord was adding to the church daily those that were being saved. Pretty simple, isn't it? Who does the adding to the church, to the body? Who does the adding? Say it. God does. On whose terms, Lee? His. Now, what are God's terms today? To be a part of his family, to be a part of the church, to be one of those that he's going to add to the body of believers. How are we going to know what that's all about? If we consider the scripture very simply, in Mark's account at the end of 16, He said, go into all the world and deliver or preach the good news. Well, good news is the resurrection. That's what's under consideration. Go and tell people. Well, do you have to work up to it for some? Do you have to lay some foundation about God and the Old Testament and the prophets? Sometimes you have to do that. But when it's all said and done and it comes right down to it, here's the deal. Go and preach the good news to every person. He that believes, well, under consideration in that section is the resurrection. Because when you look at that beginning in verse 14, it says that he came to the apostles and upbraided for their unbelief because they didn't believe the reports that those that had seen him after he was risen from the dead. Well, they should have believed he rose from the dead. Why should they have believed that? Because he'd been telling them that for 3 years. You know, I'm going to be in the grave and raise out. I'm going to be like Noah in the fish and come out 3 days later. He kept telling them, I'm going to die, but I'm going to raise again. And who made the report, ladies? Help me out here. I liked it. Who went and told the apostles he rose from the dead? The ladies did. I'd like to think that I would be a believer when you came and told me. But what did the apostles do? Went running out to see it for themselves. And when you get in Mark 16, back to 16, looking at verse 14 and 15 and 16, how did Jesus respond to their response? Well, upbraided them for their unbelief. They were supposed to believe the report, but they didn't. But when they saw him, and he ascended into heaven and gave the instructions about what should be done, what did they do? They went and told that very simple message. When you read it in Acts chapter 2, and it talks about a lot of things with David and prophecies and fulfillments, and you put him to death and God raised him up. But when it finally came right down to the end, it does say the response of the people that were hearing. And what did they say? Speaking to Peter, men and brethren, what shall we do? It says they were cut to the heart. What shall we do? Now listen, what did Peter say? Repent and be baptized for the forgiveness of your sin. The very thing Jesus said, go and preach. But he that believes, right? Well, we know they were believing because they're asking. Then he go on and said some other things and taught some other things, and they were meeting. But when they finally get down to the end of chapter 2, it says he was adding to the Lord was adding to their number, or adding to the church daily those that were being saved. Now make it easy. Who are the saved? Those that believe and are baptized. Pretty simple. Who could do that? Who could do that? Anybody. Anybody. Well, back to what we're looking at, but that's what was happening. They wanted to rejoin. Well, there's no rejoining. They were out. They were off. They were gone. God was no longer considering them as his people, even though they thought they were. They wanted to be the people. And how many years have their ancestors, their relatives, been telling them that you are part of? And you're thinking, well, Brother Brandt, that's pretty easy. That's about 150 years. So several generations have gone by. And they're still teaching that, but that's not what was being taught by God. So down to question 3 then. That's going to be heresy. I can't say that. Who can say that word? There you go. Well, what did they, that's a king really, and what was he hearing? This is the Persian king. What was he hearing? What was the accusation? I had chapter 3 and verse 6, or 4 and verse 6. They're rebellious. They're an evil city. They'll not pay tribute. They'll not pay custom. They won't pay the toll. Well, if I were the king and I was counting on tax, how would I feel about that? Whoa. We don't want that rebellious stuff. So he had all that. He listened. And of course, down in really question 4, what did the commander of the king, Hasariah, what did he say? He was being told about the not paying the taxes and so on. I should have had it down there on question 4. Well, notice a few things from New Testament again. First, they wanted to, these people that really were the northern tribes that had kind of mingled in down there. First, they wanted to help. And when they couldn't help, they wanted to cause trouble. They wanted to somehow bring it to an end. Think with me about, as you read in the account of in John 11 about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, right? And when the people saw it, they were amazed. And they went and reported to the Jewish council. And how did they react? Were they amazed? Yeah, they were mad. And they took counsel on how they might kill him. Now help me out here. How do you kill somebody that raises people from the dead? How about when he was in Luke 19, I put down, he was teaching the people. He was teaching the people. And because the people were listening, you're looking there in Luke 47, around there, and the people were giving heed, that's because they were listening, how did the officials react? How did the Jewish leaders react? Well, it just says in verse 47, because he was teaching the people, they took again counsel how they might destroy him. Jealousy is a terrible thing. I also put up here in about restoring the man with the hand in Matthew chapter 12, verse 14. The same thing. You know, he was going to restore the man that had the withered hand. You remember how that was? And they said, "Whoa, on the Sabbath?" And what did Jesus say? If your animal fell in the ditch, would you rescue him? And what would be the answer? Yes, even on the Sabbath. So he healed the man's hand, stretched it out there, became just like nothing wrong with it. And again, they took counsel how they might destroy him. If you have all the popularity, and somebody else has none, or they used to have all the popularity and now theirs is decreasing because you're receiving it, there can be jealousy involved, and that's exactly what we're seeing. If you can't be a part of it, I don't want you to have it either. So they sent the letters, and of course we talked about that, how that they searched, found the edict, and you come down and you see that you're going to have in verse 24, in the 2nd year of Darius. Well, case closed. Well, how long did the work on the house of God continue? And I put down here until the 2nd year of Darius. Well, when did Darius become king? Look on your little chart. When did Darius become king? Oh, Brother Brant, we have it right here. What are you seeing? $520. You see that down there? Work on the temple renewed under Darius when he became king. Remember, he sorted out the letter, found the letter, said, get the building. Not only that, did he advise them, as you would read through the scripture and read the accounts, not only let them build, you see they get all supplies they need to do the building. That would have been a smack in the face, wouldn't it? Anyway, under Darius, and so you're seeing there that in the second year of Darius, the temple was completed, and you would see that around 516, around 516. So anyway, down to chapter 5, I don't know if you got into chapter 5, may look ahead a little bit, but what's this all about? You know, I've said it a few times before, but what's all the record for? Why have it all written down? We don't have everything, everyday life written down. We have these accounts written down. So why do we have it? Yeah, so that we can look back and see how it all came together. You remember we passed out those things about fulfilled prophecies, 543 or something like that. That's just dealing with Christ. But when you think about all the things that God said would be accomplished, all the things about the land, all the things about the people, all the things about the building, we can read that. And we've talked about the genealogies. I'm not going to read a bunch of those, but who's that for? Well, so that 100 years, 200, really by the time we get to Ezra, Christ is coming 400 years later, generation after generation.
Well, that's kind of the history book for them.
There you go. That's what I was going to use.
Also, it shows God's pattern and His plan.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, the fulfillment of prophecy, that God had a plan from the beginning, that it wasn't just,
You're right.
together as a plan.
It was.
Genealogy ties
You can.
that plan together.
Yep. And not only, you're saying the right thing, but especially with the priests and the Levites, they were the teachers, they were the leaders, they were the ones that provided instruction, they were the ones that handled the worship. And when we think about the priests, they were of what tribe? Their family? Aaron. And Aaron was who? What's his claim to fame? I'm coming over to hear you. Yes? Whose brother was he? And you're thinking, well, we'll have that next week. But seriously, who was it? Yes, there you go. So, but from the very beginning, when they came into the land, the law was given, and here's the priest. And generation after generation after generation after generation. And like Steve is saying, we don't have everyday life, but we have the law, the direction, the instruction that continued generation after generation after generation. And here we are. We're not tied to the Old Testament, but it does give us encouragement to know that it worked out just the way that God said it would. I think about the teaching we see in Ephesians when it talks about Christ and His coming and the plan before the foundation of the world. You know, I think about that from time to time when I reread or restudy the book of Ephesians. Can you imagine the sadness, the hurt in the back of God's mind, if I can use that terminology, that He knew eventually what was going to happen? Yeah, His Son was going to die. And it wasn't just when He was born and lived on the earth. He knew before anything was even created. The plan was before the foundation of the world. You can read that in the Ephesian letter, around verse 3 or 4. And all the time, waiting. So what's He waiting for now? For the obedience of the people. And we're the ones that know the truth. We're the ones that share the truth. But think of the sadness. I don't know how to word that too well. But think of the sadness in God's mind when the end finally comes. Who knows? Who knows what the end will be like? Oh, I know, we know, fire and those kind of things. But I mean the lost tragedy of the multiple millions, billions that are going to be lost. What a sadness to God, knowing that that's the case. And how about us? While we're living, we know that too. So, as we have opportunity or make opportunity, it's not time yet. Is it time? Okay. As we have time, opportunity, let us share the message. Now, will everybody be a believer? I mean, it's so simple, but will everybody be a believer? No. They won't. I wish they would, but they won't. Even when you read Peter's account again in Acts, there in Acts 2, verse 24 or 5, it says, all that call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. But yet when they asked, what shall we do? He didn't say, call on the name of the Lord. What he said was, repent and be baptized for the forgiveness of your sin. He told them how to call on the Lord. Anyway, so when we have the accounts and we look back and we can see page after page after page after page after page, and I know we sit here and think, man, how boring is that? And it can be. But the thing is, it's the good news that it's preserved. It's preserved. And we don't have to wonder if this is really what it was supposed to be. Because if you'll be an honest student and an honest reader, it fits together like a hand in a glove. God intended this. So, when we come back next week, we're going to have chapter 5, 6, and 7, so work ahead a little bit. We're a week behind. But I want you to think how important it is for these people and for their children's children. And as we get to the end, we're going to see that, in chapter 10, they have to have some adjustments made and some changes in their life. And, then we're going to, if we were studying further, we'd go to the book of Malachi, and we find them right back in the same thing. Faithfulness, your choice. See you next week. And a closing question. Okay, be looking at chapter 5, 6, and 7. And we'll move ahead a little more quickly, but it's so exciting to me.